What exactly is the White House trying to get out of this weekend's talks?
Well, they're trying to lay the groundwork for and eventually achieve a longer-term peace deal. In a nutshell, right now, of course, there's a 2-week ceasefire, which the president announced earlier this week, and what he would like is to have something longer-term. So by sending Vice President Vance, he's sending the second highest official in his government to try and hammer that out. There are a bunch of hurdles, not least of which the fact that Iran is now saying that they would like to have their assets unfrozen and to have a ceasefire in Lebanon before even going to the talks. So that is certainly hanging over this, even as Vice President Vance is in the air. But if they proceed, then the overall goal is to get something that's longer term and to try to do so in the next 2 weeks.
What would a successful weekend meeting look like? Like, what precise objectives would we be reading about on Monday morning where you would deem it a success?
You know, I think probably a success would be if they don't fail, if they don't say we're done and we're not going to continue and the ceasefire is over. I mean, that's a pretty low bar, and yet given the fact that there's a question mark now as to whether they'll even proceed after Iran's latest demands, I think that that would probably be seen as a success. No doubt others would like to see more, but let's be clear. You can't get all of the points that that both sides want hammered out in a weekend. But if they get started, if they establish a decent working relationship, that alone will be progress from the talks that were going on right before the war started, which were led by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. You know,
So this fragile truce was announced earlier this week, more than 2 days ago at this point. And then late yesterday, the president warned Iran against charging tolls. He said there are reports that Iran is charging fees to tankers going through the Hormuz Strait. They better not be, and if they are, they better stop now. He also told the New York Post on Friday that U.S. warships are being reloaded with, quote, the best ammunition to launch fresh attacks if the talks faltered. How is this? I don't know if this is the art of the deal, if this is part of the negotiation strategy, but it doesn't seem like things are totally moving in the right direction.
Well, and the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is not entirely open yet either is not in line with what the president said he wanted in order to agree to a ceasefire. Yeah, he's leaving plenty of options out there for himself, and that's one reason why he's leaving forces in the region. Again, this is a temporary truce. This is a temporary ceasefire. If they don't come up with a deal, then the president has said the shooting will start again. And that threat, of course, is hanging over these talks.
I wanted to go there next. Just talk about how seriously is the threat of escalation? How serious is the escalation if the talks do fail?
I mean, I think it's certainly serious. The president has said so, and the president has gone back and forth in terms of what he's really wanted, whether he wanted to escalate, whether he wanted things to end. The fact, again, that these talks are actually happening and that he agreed on a ceasefire on Tuesday before following through on his threat to bomb the Iranian civilization and get rid of bridges and civilian infrastructure and using very, very harsh rhetoric in that pledge was seen as a huge sign of progress. But that doesn't take away all of the hurdles that remain, and it doesn't make a weekend negotiation any easier.
Jeff, if we sort of boil this down to the reason we think that the U.S. went to war, and the U.S. and Israel went to war with Iran in the first place, it was about nuclear weapons and the ability for Iran to actually get a nuclear weapon. How does that factor into what we've heard from Iran with what they want to be able to do versus the U.S. demand for that enrichment to stop? Where's the daylight there?
Well, that certainly is one of the bigger objectives. I would add, though, Tim, that the objectives weren't entirely spelled out at the beginning of this war. But you're certainly right to pinpoint that one, and that is something that the president has said for a long time, that he doesn't want Iran to have the ability to build and have a nuclear weapon. So, to your questions about the specifics, how do they figure that out? Iran still has uranium, and it's in the ground, and the president has suggested that the United States and Iran could work together to dig that up. I don't know if that's something that Iran would agree to. It is interesting to compare where we are now with where the world was with the JCPOA agreement, the Iranian nuclear deal that was forged during the Obama administration, which President Trump was very critical of and eventually took the United States out of. That included international monitoring of Iran's nuclear program and of that uranium. So perhaps monitoring would be back on the table. Not sure if that's something Iran would agree to or not. All of these, again, are questions and are points that they'll have to hammer out at the talks.
Jeff, you've been following this for a while. We were talking with a prior guest about how global trade has been it's changed indefinitely. And I'm curious how your view has kind of evolved as the conflict has evolved. Does it seem like we're closer to the end, a resolution, than maybe we were a few weeks ago? Or is the momentum heading in the other direction?
Oh, we're certainly closer. I mean, the fact that they've got a ceasefire is closer. But that doesn't mean that the ceasefire is going to last. That is an unanswerable question at this point. It just depends entirely on how these talks go and what other developments happen in the meantime. The Lebanon peace has been hanging over the ceasefire and hanging over these talks ever since President Trump announced it. So that is something that we'll just have to see if they hammer that out. And to see to what extent Israel plays ball on that as well. But, broadly, and I think you saw this in the market reaction after the ceasefire was announced, people see this as progress. But there have been times throughout this war where people have seen progress or have had the impression that the president was leading towards an off-ramp, only for him to pull back and go in the other way and use escalatory language. So all of that are things that people should consider when they're trying to decipher where things are going next.
A little after lunchtime, Jeff, the president saying in a post on his social media network, the Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using international waterways. The only reason they are alive today is to negotiate. And he signed that, President Donald J. Trump. It does seem like that is a pretty big card, the Strait of Hormuz. Just 45 seconds here. That is the card.
I couldn't say it any better, Tim. That's the card. And they're playing it, and they know that they have that card, and the president can say that he wants them to open it, and he can say that he wants to have control over it, or he wants to have joint control over it, but the geography is such that that is their area of the world. And they know that, and they have seen the impact that having control over it has had over the last 5 to 6 weeks, and that's something they're going to hold on to until or unless they are given something in exchange.